Today we're going to cover the tank class for the Guardian Juggernaut, which is the Defense and Immortal subclass. What you'll see is that this is a little bit of an ambitious task. There's going to be a lot of things covered for the tanking fundamentals. So if you need to reference this again in the future, there will be chapters below that you can jump around to the relative sections that will help you. The most important part is to use some flashpoints and practice a little bit. We're just going to cover the first part of the abilities. The first one is going to be Guardian Slash, Repose, Warning Strike, Blade Barrage, Force Stasis, Force Sweep, Blade Storm, Blade Saber Throw, Dispatch, Strike. On the Juggernaut Immortal side, those same abilities are Crushing Blow, Retaliation, Aegis, Assault, Savage, Force Choke, Smash, Force Scream, Saber Throw, Vicious Throw, Assault. My suggestion is to arrange your abilities on your tray in this order. It's going to make more sense for you to see what's going on and to be planful. You'll see some of the abilities have a 4, that's a 4 times multiplier, and some abilities have a 3, and it's a 3 times multiplier, and we'll cover what that is. The triangles are AoE conal attacks. The double plus signs are defensive bonuses that are gained with these attacks. The star is an AoE around you in a circle. The little airplane icon is range attacks. Blade Storm by its default is not a range attack, but we're going to make it one. And it's not a conal by default, but we're going to make it one. Okay. If you notice that the defensive abilities are together, we're going to activate them in this sequence. Blade Barrage is going to be on a different cooldown. It's just going to be separate. We'll cover that. You'll see that the AoEs that are not part of our big rotation are separate. They all together here on their own, and slot 7 and 8 is 6 and 7. And then in 7 and 8 we have the range attack. So this is going to be helpful in you being planning your attacks. If you need to pick up an enemy at range, you're going to see that you might want to save your saber throw and not put it in your rotation so that you can tag those enemies at range. If it's a cluster of enemies that's going to join the fight, then you can use your AoE range attack with the conal to grab them all together at the same time, and you might want to stop using Blade Storm. Okay. Our defensive and utilities abilities are Warning Call, Saber Ward. These are our big defensives. Our big heal is Focus Defense. Our Cleanse is Inure, but there's some scenarios where we can use Inure as a defensive. Saber Reflect is a defensive that we can pick. And then Threatening Focus has a utility that is very, very powerful. And we're going to look on how that works for us. This is just a quick overview of what your ability tree is. If you want to just have a quick reference of what you should pick, this is where you can look at it. And we'll dive into depth as to how this ability tree puts the class all together. The tacticals, Grit Teeth used to be the default big tactical. In my opinion, Horde's Makashi Strike is probably a better tactical these days. And if you're going to fight mobs, Leviathan's Hide is a really good tactical. For implants, Force Resistance Package and Final Breath Package is the best defaults. Some people will go with Retaliator Package. Just know that Retaliator Package is in conflict with Horde's Makashi Strike. That'll become clear as we do that. Do not use these two together. If you do, you're not going to gain any benefit of the Repose if you want to use the maximum out of the Makashi Strike. So my suggestion is that you go with the Horde's Makashi Strike, Final Breath, and Force Resistance Package as your starting setup. If you do want to get the Grit Teeth, you cannot buy it just from the tactical vendor. You have to craft it with Biochem 700. And to get the schematic, you go to the supply section in the fleet. On the outer base, as you face to the outer base, second from the right, you'll find a vendor called Keybinds. And the schematic is Biochem Tactical 2. And you can get that schematic from that vendor. It takes a lot of resources to craft Grit Teeth, so either buy it if you don't want to spend the resources from the GTN, or make some investments and spend some time doing this. Okay, we need to look a little bit about the damage pathways. The way that damage works in this game is that you have incoming damage, and with all incoming damage, there's an accuracy associated with it. The first thing is defense chance is evaluated, and if the accuracy trumps the defense chance, then the damage goes through to the next step, which is then your shield chance gets evaluated. If the shield chance does not trigger, the damage goes straight through the shield. If it does trigger, the shield absorption percentage reduces that damage and then gets to the next step. The next step being damage reduction, and then the damage reduction is a flat damage reduction, and then you get your received damage. For internal and elemental damage, we'll get back to the defense chance. Usually you can consider those not being evaluated for defense chance. There's no shield being evaluated for internal elemental damage. It just goes to the damage reduction, but this is a different damage reduction, and we'll see that in the game. Then the damage reduction that you have over here, it's usually a reduced damage reduction, and any ability that increases all damage received will also increase the damage reduction for internal elemental damage. The reason why I say that there is no defense chance for internal elemental damage is that it appears that internal and elemental damage just have a very high accuracy associated with it. In some very unique scenarios, you can increase your defense chance to astronomical levels, and then you see the internal and elemental damage for most setups being avoided, meaning that the internal and elemental damage most likely just has a very high accuracy associated with it. This being said, for each type of attack, whether it's a weapon attack or a range attack or a force tech damage attack, when it comes to specific bosses, certain attacks will have different accuracies associated with it. This can get really confusing. You'll sometimes notice that your defense chance did avoid some damage, and then on other situations that there's zero damage being affected by defense chance. And what's really happening is the accuracy is just for those attacks are really, really high. As I mentioned before, you'll notice that if you can pump up your defense chance on certain attacks really high, you somehow see it creep back in. Okay, so the Jedi Assassin specializes in defense chance, and the Vanguard Partic specializes in shield chance and shield absorption. The Guardian and the Juggernaut, they specialize in damage reduction. Now, each of these classes have a little bit of the other classes' benefits. It's just that their main attack and their main mechanism is specialized in these areas. So for the Guardian, it's a great thing. We always have damage reduction involved. So it's a great starter class to start with because damage reduction is always going to be applicable. The Vanguard Power Tech is also really, really nice. The shield chance and the shield absorptions is really great. It has an ability that can avoid certain damages at a very high level for a short period of time. It has great heals built in. It just doesn't have a personal cleanse, but a really great tank. The Jedi Assassin, the Shadow Assassin, most people perceive this as not being the great class. What the truth is that for mobs and AoE mobs and low-level enemies, they work really great because their accuracies are very low. So the defense chance that they can achieve just totally trumps those accuracy values, and it always is applicable. The truth is that it doesn't have a lot of shield chance and damage reduction for extended period of time, and that's why you see it against champions being a little bit weaker, because champions tend to have a little bit more accuracy. The truth is that it really becomes fight dependent, and this is what I want to stress real clearly. The Shadow Assassin is the utility king. They can manipulate certain fights and certain mechanics and completely avoid certain damage that is incoming. So it becomes really, really fight dependent. Don't just avoid the Shadow Assassin because it appears to be a little bit weaker. The truth is that they can completely avoid certain damage that is incoming in many fights. So what will often happen is you'll have a Shadow Assassin paired with a Guardian Juggernaut. Shadow Assassin dealing with mobs, picking them up. They're very, very good with their AoE attacks. And the Guardian Juggernaut dealing with the champions or the bosses main damage, and when the utility effects need to be applied, the Shadow Assassin comes in and does those mechanics. A really good pairing. In some fights you just want Shadow Assassin tanks. They are just really, really useful. Damage types. We just have to understand that all damage have these tags associated with it. That being said, certain tags are mutually exclusive. You can't have a range and a melee. You can't have an internal elemental and a direct. So some of them are mutually exclusive, but you could have an AoE attack that does direct damage in that AoE vicinity. That seems a little bit confusing, but if you have a defensive that applies to AoE and it has an AoE tag associated with it, then it would work. And if you have a defensive that affects direct attacks, then that would work. You could even have an AoE that applies AoE that then does direct attacks, meaning that there's an area that is affected that applies an AoE to every player around it. So if they all stack up, they'll all share the damage that they receive. We could have a conal AoE attack that is a melee damage that is considered direct. We could even have a damage over time that applies an AoE, that if anybody is in that area, they also get the internal damage. That AoE could spread and apply a damage over time to other players in that area that then get an AoE. So these area of attacks can become really complicated. The main thing to understand is that the developers develop a fight for an intended mechanic. They might tweak a certain attack to have a high accuracy so it can't be avoided. They might tweak a certain attack to have an AoE tag so you can use your AoE defensives. They might tag something to have a range attack or a melee attack. Whatever it is, your defensives are going to be sort of paired with whichever attack you see incoming. The main concept to take away from this is that you have to learn the fight. This is a very common thing for tanks to have to spend some time and learning the fights, and we'll get to the tools available to learn those fights on your own. Threat mechanisms is a very key portion of the whole game for tanks. Tanks have to understand threat very well. It's not just a blanket like you do something and the ads will always follow you or the boss will always follow you. We have to understand how our threat works. So most of our tank damage on the Guardian is multiplied by 3, and that creates our threat. So whatever damage you do for most of your attacks, you multiply that by 3 and it's threat. For a few key abilities, that multiplier is 4. And the first slide when we looked at the abilities, I flagged them as 4 or 3 to indicate that. The way that single target taunts work, it takes the highest threat in the group, adds 10% of that threat, then establishes that new value, takes your threat and subtracts it and gives you the remainder. That seems really confusing, but the main thing about single target taunts is that it gets you to 110% of what the highest threat was in the group. That's how it gets there. The mechanism is that it doesn't give you the 110% altogether. It just achieves that by taking your current threat. So let's look a little bit here at a situation. We have two bosses. We have a DPS attacking the green boss and a DPS attacking the yellow boss over here on the right. You can visualize it as if you were to look at the log files, as everybody has a bucket from every enemy. So the green boss, every person has a green boss bucket. Everybody has a yellow boss bucket. As you do damage to each of these enemies, you generate threat. And for DPS, it's a one-to-one relationship. The damage that they do is the equivalent to the threat that they generate. So if the DPS is attacking the green boss and the tank is attacking the yellow boss, the green bucket for the tank is going to be empty. If they were to go ahead and taunt the yellow enemy, it looks at the yellow buckets only. So if the tank's yellow bucket is the highest bucket, it will take the tank's yellow bucket value, add 10% and give that to the tank. For the green enemy, the green bucket for the tank is still going to be empty. If they were to go ahead and taunt the green boss, they would look at all of the green buckets. To flip it around to the real mechanism is that if we look down below, what's really going on is that every enemy has a threat table, and or otherwise referred to as an aggro table, and they independently look at the damage and the threat that's being generated for them. So for green enemy, the tank might be really low at say 8,000, and for the yellow enemy they might be up at 700,000. If we now look at the AoE Taunt, it does the same thing just for all of the enemies when it comes to taunts. So if the tank was to AoE Taunt this boss, these bosses, what will happen is for the green enemy, the highest is 500,000 threat. That 10% addition would make this 550,000. The tank is currently at 8,000. So we take the 550 minus 8,000, then we get to 542,000 that's being added to the tank, but only onto the green enemy. For the yellow enemy, we're looking at 700,000. So another 70,000 will be added on for the 10%. So what we see as the threat for that AoE Taunt is a single value of 542,000 plus the 70,000 as a lump sum. So this is what gets confusing in the log files. We see this whole big chunk of taunt value coming in. What we need to understand is that they independently separated in the back end of the engine, and they depended on each of the bosses. Now let's look at the one more feature. Every taunt has a guaranteed hold aggro for 6 seconds that ignores the threat table. When the taunt goes out for 6 seconds, you have that guaranteed aggro on that boss. This gets us into a little bit of trouble if we don't understand the next step. So let's look at a little bit of numbers. Let's play this through in a scenario where the tank and the DPS at 5 seconds into the fight are both at 100,000. The DPS being at 100,000 damage, which is equal to their threat, and the tank being at 100,000 threat. They're both at 20,000 threats per second. If at 5 seconds the tank taunts, the tank is going to go up to 110,000 total threat, 22,000 threat per second, so they are ahead. So this all looks good. If they weren't to do any other threat generation, which means they're not attacking the boss or anything else, and we go to the 10 seconds mark, what we see is that the tank is still at 110,000 threat. Still has that guaranteed 6-second aggro because we're only 5 seconds later in. The DPS now is at 200,000. So a second from now at 11 seconds, the boss is going to switch back to the DPS. The main concept here is that you have to keep doing attacks. Especially at the start of the fight, you have to keep doing attacks to keep that aggro built up. Now, if there's a 10-second taunt, post 10 seconds, we'll take the highest threat from the DPS, give that to the tank at 10% increase, so 220, so it looks good. If the tank still doesn't do anything else, at 15 seconds in, you'll see the DPS is now ahead. And at 20 seconds in, it looks even worse. We do need to know something else a little bit about threat. For healers, their threat is an AoE awareness, meaning that whenever they do a heal, every enemy in the area is aware of that threat. That threat is incredibly low. It's only a third of what the healer is healing at. But if nobody else is attacking that enemy, that means that the tanks and the DPS don't establish their awareness to that enemy. Then that enemy is going to look at the healer. That's why in most fights, when an enemy enters the area, they beeline it for the healers who have really low aggro. And all you have to do is just tag that enemy with some damage. They have their own independent threat table. But for the healers, they'll be right on top because nobody else has done anything. That's why I was talking about those range attacks that you want to save for certain scenarios where there's new enemies that introduce themselves. So you might have to save a range attack, or you might have to save an AoE attack, expecting them to join the fight. So let's look a little bit at some of these graphs. This is a threat table of a whole fight. You can see that the blue one is the tank. Right off the start, we can see that the tank is a little bit behind, but jumps ahead, and then stays ahead and doesn't do any other taunt right after the start. See them fluctuating through, and then here's a little taunt for 10% gain, and another taunt for another 10% gain, taunt for 10% gain, 10% gain right here, and here at the end is a big jump. This is a double taunt, meaning it's an AoE taunt and a single target taunt right before the burn phase. The green line at the bottom is the healer. This healer is healing around average about 18,000 heals per second, but they're sitting around 6,000-7,000 threat. So you can see here they use the threat reducer to reduce their threat. But you can quickly see that this is the tank is always working as trying to stay on top. And you'll notice that the graph is slowly drifting down. And what's happening here is that their attack level threat generation is much lower. So as the fight progresses, it becomes less and less critical because they can start stacking these values high. But they still do want to keep some threat generation going. Otherwise, this slope here would be a much more aggressive downwards. So right off the start of the fight, you can see that the tank is really aggressive at maintaining it. The little bumps and gives you a way that the tank is doing constant attacks. Here is a portion where I know for a fact the tank is not doing much, but you can see that slope is really smooth. And here the tank at the end here does another attack, and then you see the normal bumps slowly returning back again. Okay. So the tool that I used for this is the website called Parse.io. Let's jump to that real quick and just have a look. For you to be able to do the same thing, you'll need to activate combat logs. So in your preferences under the game engine settings, you're going to do combat logging, and you're going to enable combat logging to file. You'll find your combat logs in your My Documents folder. There's going to be a Star Wars, the Old Republic folder, and a combat logs. So now here in the browser, I've selected a combat log. We're going to look at the same one we just saw in the graph. I'm going to analyze it. You can see I can see all of my actions where I fought, and I want to look at this one right here on the left. And I'm going to go back to my threat table here, and I see that exact same graph. I can see the actual threat per second is really, really high for the whole group, and we can get a breakdown per character, and we see the tank is up at 100,000, so no problem at maintaining this. But what's handy is to be able to look at different phases. So let's look at just by clicking here, we can just look at that first phase, and we see a slightly different story. The numbers look a little bit different because it's just looking at this one. If we look at Stalker Protocol phase, we can see what's going on here. So the threat being generated is the DPS is actually ahead of the tank. We just started a little bit higher than the tank initially. And we can see where some of these mechanics play into it. There was a taunt here in the middle, and that jumped us ahead. But initially, just from threat being generated in this stage, we were below the DPS, and then we jumped up above with a taunt up there, and then we were able to reestablish the top. But the overall, you click on change point of view, change phase, entire combat, and we can look at that phase here again. There's that taunt in that protocol right there. So theoretically we were getting close, but we didn't have a real problem. We maintained it with a taunt. Okay, so what's also handy in this tool is we can look at damage received, and we can see how much the tank did. This is really handy in analyzing where things went wrong. If we were to look at a certain phase, let's look at polarized beam, we can see that different players were taking different attacks. If this line was low and everything and then spiked up somewhere, that would be an indication that at certain point for all the players, if all the lines go up, that everybody was taking damage. Maybe we avoided missed the mechanic that we had to take hold of. Then we can come down, see what damage players did, and then we can drill down even more by taking the change point of view and going, let's say we go to the tank. We can then see down below which attacks it was, which attacks was doing the most damage, and we can really get a breakdown of what was going on in the fight. Let's go back to overall, go to the entire combat. We can now go to the replay function, and we get a graphical map overview of the fight. We can now hit the play button, and we can see the actual fight as it progressed. We can see the tank and the enemy sitting here. We can mouse over them. We can see everybody here in the fight. We can see the health points as they were fighting, what they were activating, what the boss was activating, and we can even mouse over and see some of these other features in this fight. We can pause it in the fight. We can jump around in the fight. Okay, so we can see how we were doing. Let's go back and continue, and we'll come back to this tool and see how it can be useful for other scenarios. At this point, we have enough information to start looking at our opening sequence. We'll have to cover this a little bit more in depth as we go further on, but what we can see here is that our taunt is going to be our second ability right after threatening focus. But what we have to understand is that taunt, threatening focus, and challenging call are instant casts, meaning that we can do them while the global cooldown is still going for forced leap. So as we leap in, we immediately taunt, threatening focus. That means this 3 abilities were all on one global cooldown. Next one is Guardian Slash. Guardian Slash will make Repose be a gold. That will make an instant cast Repose. So this doesn't take a global cooldown. And then Warning Strike, and then Challenging Call is our AoE Taunt. So everything happens within 3 global cooldowns. 1 for Force Leap, 1 Guardian Slash, Warning Strike, and then Challenging Call. For most tanks, we don't taunt this early off the opening sequence because we're multiplying 10% increase on a very small threat level. But we're using this taunt to guarantee us 6 seconds of aggro. The threatening focus will reduce our 15-second taunt down to 10 seconds. So if we go further on, we now 2 global cooldowns in. Then we have a challenging call. This will give us another 6 seconds of guaranteed aggro, which also multiplied by 10% this big hit where we did 3 abilities in 2 global cooldowns. And then we're going to have Blade Barrage 1, Force Stasis 2, Force Sweep 3, Blade Storm 4, Saber Throw 5. This is 7.5 seconds, so this last one is going to be without the forced aggro taunt, and then we taunt again. If we do know that this is going to be a problem for us, we can always move our challenging call to after Blade Barrage, because we're still under the taunt for 1, 2, 3, 4 stasis is where it will fall off. So if we move the challenging call to after Blade Barrage, we will have taunts throughout this whole thing. But the challenging call is going to be quite flexible here. The reason why I place it here is that this will generate enough threat that we guaranteed to have the enemy as a focus on us. We can look, there's no need to really move challenging call behind it. The reason why challenging call is nice to have it early on is that if the other tank has to taunt off of us fairly soon, then we got this in really early. That tank, if they taunt off of us, say at this point anywhere in the fight, they will be getting also a really good aggro. So this is a really good aggro opening sequence, these first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 abilities. These 7 abilities all happen in 3 global cooldowns. Okay. The next problem that we face is, let's just go through Force Charge here on the Juggernaut, as then Taunt, Threatening Rage, Crushing Blow, Retaliation, Aegis Assault, Threatening Scream, Ravage, Force Choke, Smash, Force Scream, Saber Throw, Taunt. You might initially be thinking that you want Warning Strike before Guardian Slash but because of our rotation, we'd rather want to keep these 3 abilities in order: Guardian Slash, Repose, Warding Strike. It'll become clear later on. They each have the same, Guardian Slash and Warding Strike has the same global cooldown. Guardian Slash will always trigger Repose to be available. And we'll talk more about how we're going to use Repose. We do have a problem with the AoE Taunt as the opener. If we have 2 tanks, each have to deal with their own boss, this challenging call can pull that other boss onto you, and we don't want to do that. In that case, we need to flip our rotation a little bit. So opening without the AoE Taunt. Now we go deeper in. We now do Force Leap, Force Stasis, Guardian Slash, Taunt, Threatening Focus. These 2 are on 1 global cooldown. The reason is these 2 are our 4 times multiplier abilities. Force Stasis will give us a Focus or Rage extra stack for Guardian Slash to be activated, plus the Force Leap. And then we Taunt, Threatening Focus. What you'll notice is that we now have to deal with a little bit of the Taunt being a little bit later. So this is going to be important when we talk about opening timing and how to plan for that. You'll see Repose is not in here. We don't want Repose in this opening sequence. Okay, and then we do Warning Strike, Blade Barrage, Force Sweep, Blade Storm, Saber Throw, Strike. You'll see that you can do another strike. Strike is going to be our main filler. These 3 abilities aren't real fillers. They're doing some significantly more damage than Strike. You can see that you'll be able to fit in another strike. I would just wait that half second and then do the Taunt. But this is your opening sequence. You pretty much go right through the line, Guardian Slash, then you Taunt, Threatening Focus, Warning Strike, Blade Barrage, Force Sweep, Blade Storm, Saber Throw, Strike, and then wait for that half second and Taunt. Okay, this will be really handy for you when you just have to keep a single boss on you and not pull everything onto you. For the Juggernaut Immortal, there's Force Charge, Force Choke, Crushing Blow, Taunt, Threatening Rage, Aegis Assault, Ravage, Smash, Force Scream, Saber Throw, Assault, Taunt. Okay, now after your opening, the main thing that you manage is these 3 abilities off the start. Guardian Slash, Repose, Warning Strike are going to go as a set. Whenever you activate Guardian Slash, the Repose, you can do it right off the global, before the global cooldown even gets off. So you can activate Guardian Slash, Repose, and then wait for the global cooldown and Warning Strike. This will set up a unique scenario for you that we can talk about. So these 3 abilities will take 2 global cooldowns, and then Blade Barrage is whenever it comes off cooldown, and then your filler is you're going to just strike. The remainder of your abilities you're going to use as sort of situational setups, especially as the fight progresses. You might activate some of them to do a little bit harder hit and get a little bit more emphasis in at certain points, or you might save some of them for range attacks that you might need, or you might save some of them for other utilities. So you're going to be planful. Go and look at that first set of abilities chart that I had up, where you can look at which are your AoE attacks and which are your range attacks. Okay, we can move on now and look at some other concepts, which is the timing when we start a fight. The normal method is to count in on a 3, 2, 1. The timing of that gap in between your 3, 2, and 1 is really important. You want to keep that consistent, and it has to be somewhat meaningful. Otherwise, what's the point of counting in? You might as well just leap in and then the fight starts. The reason why we count in 3, 2, 1 is that some attackers, some classes have a long opening cool down or a long opening casting on their first ability. Or they might want to stack a few things on the front of the attack before the fight starts. So if you keep the timing pretty much on a sequence of what a global cooldown is, like 3, 2, 1, and everybody agrees the fight starts on 1, not after 1, then people can say, well, on 2, I start my sequence, and I know by the 1 counter it still happens. This helps you to be training your group a little bit to be more effective. You might find in some situation that you jumping on 2 to have that extra global cooldown to settle the boss down, or to get certain mechanics off the start before the rest do. If you do so, just tell your group like, hey, we start on 1, I have to deal with a little mechanics here. Otherwise, you start training a group that you started the fight on 2. If some DPS are going to start launching in on 2 and that creates some complications, communicate that to them. This is an orchestrated fight. For some of these fights, they are really, complicated in certain situations. So it's important for the tank to get things, certain setups started, and we'll talk about the next step. And learn to be concise with your messaging. Like during the fight, it's like, you want to use single word triggers that cue certain effects that the team need to be ready for, and agree on this ahead of time. You sort of are the conductor of an orchestra, and you sort of have to keep everybody flowing in a certain direction. Let's look a little bit about keybinds. They can be quite handy for you. In the game, if you go to the control section, you want to enable focus target. The next thing is on the targeting side, you want to set a key for set focus target, swap focus target. It's generally the Alt F key by default. The next thing that will be handy is acquire targets target, acquire focus targets target, and focus target modifier. So some just examples of these scenarios is that if it's a 2-boss fight with 2 tanks and you have to tank swap, you can focus target the other tank's boss. And then when you need to swap targets, while you're targeting your boss, you do Alt F. It'll swap the focus targets and your target around. And so the other boss's boss will now become your main boss, and you can just taunt. Very handy. No need to tab through all of the enemies. No need to click and find the other one. You can just do an Alt F and swap. The other one is you can focus target your top DPS in mob fights, and then use your acquire focus targets target. That'll help you sort of figure out where they are attacking. If you're in the middle of a fight and you're trying to find that one enemy that is floating off, it tends to be the top DPS that has got them. So you can just hit that key and taunt that enemy, and most likely you're going to be picking the right one. The next one is to use your threat reducer. As a Guardian tank, you have a threat reducer, so you can focus target the boss. Additionally, you can just use the acquired targets target when they switch and just leap to that enemy. But another one is just to focus target the boss, because if you use the acquired targets target and the boss is still looking at you, you'll just be targeting yourself. But if you use the acquire focus targets target, if you have the boss focus target and you hit that key, you can hit it multiple times, and as soon as the boss looks at somebody else, you'll see that that person becomes your target, and then use your friendly leap to reduce their threat and to put a defensive on them. So just some examples. There's even more that you can do. The focus target modifier is another one that's handy in certain fights, but you might want to just explore these options on your own. Next is the push-pull. It's very obvious that you can pull certain melee bosses around by just increasing the distance between you and the boss, and they'll follow you around. It's quite often the tank's task to put the boss in a certain position, facing a certain direction, or get the boss to a certain position on the map for a certain mechanic. For melee bosses, this is easy, you just pull them. For range bosses, this becomes a problem because they don't care so much about the distance unless it's really extreme. In those situations, you might want to consider a line of sight situation where you pull them around an obstacle where they can't see you and they'll follow you. Some bosses that are range bosses are just stuck in place and you can't do this, but in most bosses, even range bosses, you can usually do a line of sight. The next more complicated part is the push. So every enemy has a bubble, sort of like a safety bubble, and you have a bubble. And when you encroach your bubble onto that enemy, it's quite obvious with melee bosses that they'll back away. It means that you can steer them as well, like you can go to the left of them and they'll go to the right, and you can steer them. And the same can be done with many range bosses as well. Okay, So let's have a look at this. I'm going to go back to that fight that we were looking at before, and we can look at the push-pull going on here. If you see here, I started to play the fight. See how the boss is keeping that distance? I'm pulling the boss along a little bit, and now I'm going to pull the boss to this side of the room. Okay, everybody's helping out. And now watch the push. I'm pushing into that boss, pushing that boss back in the leap. If I had to go around, that would take me so much more time than just pushing the boss back into their position. If we skip around like now, this is the pull. I'm pulling the boss, keeping my distance from the boss. Okay. So let's leap a little bit forward and look at the push technique. Again, so here I'm going to try and keep the boss in the middle of the room. So this person is going to come in and block, and the boss is going to move forward. And I come into the boss and I push him back a little bit, push him, push him, push him. Very important to learn this technique of push-pull. Some places where you can practice some of these techniques like the push-pull is Hammer Station's first boss. If you look at the map, this is the shortcut, this is the non-shortcut path. The boss is sort of here in the side here. If you as a tank get some really good aggro and you run along this arm that is a dead end, there's a little lip right here where you can go and stand behind it and the boss will follow you. It's a ranged boss, but you can do break line of sight and the boss will come right up to here. A nice little feature about this, all those little droids that spawn, well, they no longer come this far. They have a sort of imaginary line here that they won't cross, but the boss will be here and you can fight the boss here. Fun little technique. The other one is Nathema Gemini 16. This is sort of the map layout. You come down over here on the entry. There's all of these pillars and you can break line of sight with the boss, and so you can pull the boss and you can also walk into the boss, the Gemini 16, and push them. I've even pushed Gemini 16 off of the platform. It was a disastrous technique because what ended up happening is Gemini 16 just landed on the lip below and I could no longer avoid any of her attacks because she was just shooting me through the floor. But something to practice, something fun to do. She doesn't jump up ever again. You can go all the way across this and you can never do anything unless you can get sort of like a lick on her from the side. But she was right on this lip down on the sort of wall down below. But it's worth practicing and to see if you can really manipulate the boss this way. Fun thing to do. But it's really handy to practice this in flashpoints because there's some really good techniques that will be very handy in being successful at push-pulls. Okay, we're here in the game, and as you can see here, I have a little tool that can feed the information. As I'm activating abilities, you'll see it feed in from the top down. I also have my threat that I have in here. The first value is the total threat. The next value is my threat per second. The next value after that is my threat per second over the last 60 seconds, and my threat per second over the last 30 seconds. So we can sort of just keep track. This is just reading the log files and giving me this information. In addition, I'm here going to see some of the buffs and the times that they've been on. You'll notice that the buffs are going to be on my buff bar, but I'm now going to be able to display some of the seconds. So the buffs might show longer than they actually are on me. What's more important is just to see the timing of them, and that'll become clear as I show you. So let's just look at the opening sequence. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leap in, taunt, threatening focus, then guardian / repose, warding strike, and then my AoE taunt. We're just going to stop there. I just want to show you how my opening sequence and how much threat it generates per second. So there we are. So 65,000 threads per second with that combination. We really packed in a really good thread generation. For just that opening sequence, we're really on top. That's really going to help us with DPS that spike up. So let's just reset. And what we're going to do this time, we're going to do the same, but we're going to continue on with the sequence that we know that after saber throw, we're going to be able to taunt again. So keep in mind, the taunt happens, the AoE taunt happens right after Warding Strike. Then we go Blade Barrage, Force Stasis, Force Sweep, Blade Storm, Saber Throw, and then taunt again. So let's have a look here. Let's stop there. So we're now at 48,000 thread per second. So we never fall that low. So most DPS are going to be around this number at the highest for the opening rotation. And we can keep doing this. So let's go a little bit longer this time. I'm waiting for my AoE Taunt to come off cooldown. You can look at that number. And now I'm just going to strike, and now I'm doing my rotation off the start again. I'm just fillering. Taunting off cooldown, especially at the start of a fight, if you're supposed to keep aggro on the boss. Putting my AoE taunts in there, and you can see I'm now really gonna start building. But what you can notice is that I'm keeping these three abilities always together in a sequence. Okay, so you can see I can keep some really high numbers. For DPS to be really up here is going to be a real challenge for them to be up that high. I would be always keeping above that number without a problem. Let's look at the opening sequence where I'm not allowed to do an AoE taunt. Keep in mind I'm going to do Force Stasis, Guardian Slash, Warding Strike, Taunt, and then Threatening Focus. And then I go down the line with the strike. So let's have a look at that. I skipped that repose. I'm just going to do 2 strikes here and taunt again, and then I'm back to my opening. Okay, so it does look lower. Look, I'm at 30,000. It's not as great as that, but I'm going to keep a taunt during the key opening phases. Keep in mind we're now going to be 3 global cooldowns in before we taunt. So we're expecting some of the DPS to have done some damage. We're going to keep that for 6 seconds, and then we should be able to taunt again within 4 seconds. So we're going to really only have a 4-second gap where we don't have that guaranteed taunt, and that's really going to push us over. So it's a slightly different rotation. It's not as aggressive as the AoE taunt one that's built in there, but it really is very effective. We've got a benefit that's here that's called Warding Power. It's not on the ability tree, and so we just want to be aware of that, what Warding Power is. It increases the critical chance of Force Sweep and Guardian Slash by 20%. Additionally, Warding Strike deals an additional 30% damage and increases shield absorption by 3%. So the Warding Strike has a 3% damage reduction. Okay. Then if we go in here, we see we have our base Sarusu form, utilizing defensive lightsaber, increasing the armor rating by 61%, damage reduction by 6%, shield chance by 15%, threat generation by 200%, and accuracy by 10%. So we don't need any accuracy, we're already at a 10%. While utilizing Sarusu form, all damage dealt is reduced by 10%, and the strike abilities generate 1 less focus. I just wanted to cover that, so now we can look at our gear. Okay. Our gear, my suggestion is just look at the flat shield value when you're building up your gear. You want a number anywhere between 6,000 and 6,500. This armor set, if you go with first build up shield, then the rest in absorb, you'll find the most ideal number for you, because This armor set now can be used for other classes as well. Around 6,000 is a good number, 6,500 being on the upper end of range. A little bit below 6,000 can be okay. I wouldn't push it too far below 6,000. The defense chance and some of the other power and endurance and mastery, those aren't numbers that you really can play with much. They sort of are built in as the other stats. They only go higher when your item rating goes higher. So if we look at the defense, what's happening is, let's look at the shield number. We'll see that our shield chance sits around 51,000. We don't have a lot that pushes it higher than that. Our shield absorb sits at 33%. There's not much in our rotation or abilities that's going to push that much higher. But what effectively is happening is we multiply these two values together and we get that around 16% of the time for the average hits will reduce the damage by about 16%. So our shield works as another small damage reduction effectively. For a lot of repetitive hits, if our shield is constantly triggering on that on a 50% scale, the 33% damage reduction will yield a 15% or 16% average damage reduction just from our shield. So now we can look at our damage reduction as an actual value. And if here we can also see that we have two different values, one for energy and kinetic, and one for internal and elemental. They're different numbers. The internal elemental is lower. And we'll come to how these numbers get manipulated a little bit, and then we can see our defense chance is around 21%. Okay, let's go back to our combat style and start looking at the other options. So warding strike increases the damage reduction and shield absorption by 3%. There's another 3% damage reduction for 20 seconds. Generates 6 focus and deals X amount of weapon damage. Threatening focus instantly generates 6 focus, reduces the cooldown of taunt and challenge and call by 5 seconds, and damage all targets that are taunted around you. If you did have a mob, consider the challenging call and then threatening focus as a cooldown. Keep in mind, we don't have to do the threatening focus right after the taunt. We can actually delay it until the AoE taunt and then threatening focus. That will also work. It still works in our rotation. So moving that threatening focus to behind the AoE taunt is also a nice option. Our next is warding shield. Dealing damage with warding strike grants a barrier of protection to up to 8 allies within 10 meters for 6 seconds. Let's break this down. I'm going to select the other option first. And what I want to do is get up to the dummy. And what I want to look is this damage reduction. It's at 47%. I'm just going to generate some focus and we're going to hit, well, let's just hit warding strike by itself. And you'll see it went up by 3%. Okay. We see that we have this defensive right here. Damage warding strike. And we can keep that alive. So there's the 3%. Let's look at what our tactical will do. Our tactical is Horde's Makashi Strike. It replaces the warding strike damage reduction with the repose form, which is 7%. So look at it, we are 3% increase. If I now use repose, I'm going to activate repose. We went up another 4% on damage reduction because now we have repose form. If we do another warding strike, we get repose form and warding strike on top of each other. So that's why the rotation has them in this order. Guardian / repose, warding strike. Because on the first pass, we don't have the warding strike on the repose and we don't get that repose form. But on the second rotation, we now have repose taking the warding strike, which lasts for 20 seconds, and replacing it with repose form. Right after we activate warding strike and put back the 3% damage reduction. So we can sustain and increase 10% damage reduction with this Makashi Strike by just on cooldown activating these 3 abilities in order, and they match really well. That being said, as you fight in a fight, repose will suddenly get triggered by mechanics related to the boss attack being shielded. Don't activate that repose. Only activate repose after you've done Guardian Slash. This is if you're using this tactical. They really work really well together to do these 3 attacks right after the other. One Guardian Slash, guaranteed go repose will be available, and they match up real nice. You can just keep an eye on that, keeping that 10% damage reduction. Let's go back to this ability. Let's switch to Warding Shield. Warding Shield gives us another 10% damage reduction for up to 8 allies. Keep in mind we have all of this done. So watch this 56. It's going to go to 67. Okay. So for 6 seconds we have another 10% damage reduction. And if I activate this again, there's that 10% damage reduction. Okay, and 6 seconds later it falls off. Take note that our base damage reduction on internal elemental damage was 24%. We're now taking it up to 44%. Of course, our 6 seconds later we lose that 10%, but this is a 50% uptime on this Warding Shield. And we're sharing that with players around us. Really nice effect. So a tank around us would also get the damage reduction of 10% for 6 seconds. Let's look at defense chance. It's a little bit buffed here from repose. When we activate repose, we get a 5% defense chance. We can take that up with Blade Barrage a little bit more. There's 3 stacks of defensive swing. It doesn't last long, but it is there. Okay. So we now know that our big defensives lie in these 3 abilities being a set. I just want to then quickly cover Warding Call. Reduces all damage taken by 40% for 10 seconds. If we are up at 67% with these abilities and do a Warding Call, we're over 100% damage reduction. This allows us to take any amount of damage as long as the damage reduction is applied, and just eat that damage without needing to do anything for 6 seconds. This is really, really powerful. In addition to that, I'm going to jump a little bit ahead and look at line 60. Reduces all damage taken by 40% for 10 seconds. This is Warding Call. Keep in mind where we put the Warding Call in our opening sequence. It's right after Warding Strike, which now we're up at 67% damage reduction. Not yet, it's in our opening. We're going to be, let's have a look at that. All the buffs have fallen off. We're going to be at 64%. 60%. Okay. If we now do our Warding Call at this point, we're going to be at 100% damage reduction. So our opening rotation gives us a 6 seconds of 100% damage reduction. And then for the remainder 4 seconds, we're at 90% damage reduction. So that's why I like challenging call right after Warding Strike. It gives us that opening rotation where it doesn't matter what the boss does for the next 6 seconds. They can swipe us or whatever they want to do. We're not taking damage. So I just wanted to point out line 60 is there's some little bit of synergy going on with the timing of when we did Warding Call there. Okay. So Warding Shield, really, really powerful. Dust Form, targets damaged by your Force Sweep and Cyclone Slash become unsteady. Unsteady targets have their melee and range accuracy decreased by 5% for 45 seconds. In addition, damage dealt by Blade Storm is increased by 40%. So a Blade Storm is really like, as we open up, we're going to do that challenging call. We have damage reduction. By the time we get to Force Sweep and Blade Storm, if it's a mob, we're reducing their accuracy. So now, even though our defense chance is low, for mobs, we're now reducing their accuracy. And this is a great sort of, that's why I worked out this rotation in this way. So for 45 seconds afterwards, they can't actually most of the attacks are going to be reduced against you. For mobs, that is. For you cannot do this for bosses so much. Champions, it's very difficult to reduce their accuracy enough, but it does play effect in some bosses, so keep that in mind. It is handy to do. Next is Blade Burst. This turns our Blade Storm into a conal. I don't care so much about the slow for 6 seconds. Sometimes it has a negative effect, but most of the times what we're looking for is that conal attack. Then we have our Guardian Slash, and we're going to go to Crushing Mark. Guardian Slash deals 40% more damage to taunted targets. We don't need to have a real focus problem. There is another attack that is not in this rotation that I don't like because it does use 3 focus every time. And that can be a problem, but since we're not putting that in our rotation, I find that we don't have a real focus problem. Guardian Slash critical chance and threat generation is increased by 20%, and its cooldown is reduced by 1 second each time it's critically hits. So in a conal, it will come off cooldown a little bit faster with this ability, but keep in mind with our rotation, we want Guardian Slash to trigger Repose guaranteed, and Repose to proceed Warding Strike. So this option, even though it looks great, it actually can mess with our rotation because we will get Guardian Slash potentially off cooldown faster, and that could mess with this rotation sequence. If you are inclined to do so with that option, it is fine. Just keep in mind, if you're trying to use the Horde's Makashi Strike, this can be a problem in getting that extra 3% damage reduction. Line 43, I like the Marked Focus. Dealing direct damage to taunted targets generates 1 focus and heals you for 1% of your maximum health. This effect cannot occur more than once every second. This means we have our taunts available quite a bit in our opening rotation. 4 hits after every taunt is going to be a heal. And I can demonstrate this. So if I have the target taunted and I hit, there's a heal. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the next one won't have a heal. So as we do weapon attacks, which we have a lot of, we have these 1% heals. Now, just to let you know, on the Juggernaut side, the text that says 1% heal isn't there, but the 1% heal still works. So just be aware of that. Expeditious Protector increases your armor rating by 15%, and when your guarded target is attacked, your movement speed is increased by 30% for 6 seconds. This has some implication that can be really, really nice. So quite often people will guard somebody like the top DPS or the healer. Keep in mind, we've already looked at healers not generating a lot of threat, and guarding them is not going to reduce their threat by much. And the problem with healers is not the threat that they're generating, it's how they're generating threat across the whole arena. That is the real problem, and you're not taking that away by guarding the healers. So who you want to guard is the person that's going to end up taking the most damage or more consistent damage. So if there's a player that constantly is going to get dots, constantly going to get attacked by some mechanic, they're the ones that you want to guard. And the reason why is that will trigger your 30% speed increase for 6 seconds. And it can go off all the time, and that's why the guard is so nice. Healed Bash. We, as Guardians of Juggernaut, have 4 stasis as our general stun. But in the tank configuration, this is a great threat generator. So we want to put that in our sequence. And we gain a new stun, it's called Healed Bash. We do that at line 47. So we have 2 stuns, and that, keep in mind that if you need to really stun on a rotation, meaning that there's some enemy that you can break the mechanics by stunning, skip your 4 stasis, and now you have 2 stuns that you can use. Okay, in line 51, Unyielding Justice. This turns our Blade Storm into a 30-meter range. Keep in mind, on line 27, we turned it into a conal. Now it's a range conal. For 30 meters, we have a range conal in front of us. If we use Force Push, we can now turn our Blade Storm to do full damage, not just a reduced damage at the 10 meters. So if I look at this, if I go and do a force push. Look at this range attack that I have of Bladestorm that's a conal now. And I can use that to grab a whole bunch of enemies at a distance. Line 51, Blade Barrier. Activating Bladestorm grants Blade Barrier, which absorbs X amount of damage, lasts up to 10 seconds. Repose raises a Blade Barricade, increases your defense chance by 5% for 10 seconds. We've seen this already in the rotation. We looked at line 60 already, and then Abating Defense increases the shield chance by 4% and reduces the cooldown of Saber Ward by 30 seconds. Guardian Slash damage is increased by 12%. Warding Call is one of our biggest defensive because it gives us a 40% damage reduction. Saber Ward give us a defense chance increase of 50% and an absorption of 25%. Keep in mind, we're pretty much sticking close to 60% damage reduction all the time. Adding another 25 on top of it, puts us around 85 and sometimes at 95, close to 95% damage reduction. We also have our Shield Adrenal. It's always a good idea to make sure that as a tank you have a Shield Adrenal. In my case, it absorbs 30% damage up to 84,000 damage. That's another 30% damage reduction for a set period of time. And since we already have such a high damage reduction, adding this damage reduction on top of it actually makes that 84,000 a massive, massive amount of damage that it can absorb. Okay, so for line 64, reduces the cooldown of Resolute by 30 seconds and causes Resolute to heal you for 10% of your maximum health. There's not much options here otherwise. I'm going to talk about it. There's not a lot of fights where you're actually stunned. But I do want to talk about the fights where you are stunned, where you can use Stalwart Defense. Keep in mind, we're keeping our damage reduction around 60%. If we now get stunned, we add another 30% on top of it. So now we have now 90% damage reduction. So for most fights, Second Wind is better, but there are a few fights where Stalwart Defense is a sort of like a given. You can solo tank while you're stunned. Make sure that you have a lot of aggro that you grab, and you can create a lot. You're top of the list because while you're stunned, you're not going to be increasing your aggro. But your damage reduction is going to be around 90%, and that can be a really, really powerful tool. Frontline Veteran, Force Leap finishes a cooldown of Force Kick and granting immunity. This is, in some fights, I find this more useful in a few flashpoints, but there are a few fights where you get this immunity to knockdowns, incapacitating effects, and stuns, and you can use that. It's 4 seconds, but it's a really, really tight one. So line 64 is going to be really about understanding the fight that you're in and utilizing these options. Line 68, we've got Saber Reflect, which reflects ranged, forced, and tech attacks. So understand the damage that's coming towards you and when Saber Reflect can be of use. The other option is Blade Blitz. Quickly rushes forward for 20 meters and increases your defense chance by 100% while blitzing. Keep in mind that I was talking about that defense chance. Like, some attacks can be completely avoided by using Blade Blitz. Courage. Parrying, deflecting, shielding, or resisting an attack has a 50% chance to grant courage, reducing the focus consumed by your next Blade Storm or Dispatch by 1. Lasts up to 12 seconds and stacks up to 3 times. Not a real problem for us, but it is nice to have there. Line 73, I go through with Piece. Reduces the cooldown with Focus Defense by 30 seconds. Focus Defense is now at 1 minute and 30 seconds with that cooldown. Focus Defense is our big heal. It puts 12 charges on, and it heals for 20,000 for each charge that's consumed, and that happens whenever you get hit. It can also crit. So when it crits, it'll crit for around 50,000 heals. So it can be a really, really powerful heal. That's nice to have that on having that 30-second cooldown reduction. Gathering Strength. Whenever your movement is impaired, you gain a 10% damage bonus to your next ability that consumes focus. This effect can stack up to 5 times and last 15 seconds. I don't really find this really useful as a tank. our main focus is not so much on the damage side, but more on the threat generation side. And this only works for one ability. So it's really, I like the heal more than I like the damage. Okay, let's look at Inner Peace, increasing the duration of Inure by 10 seconds, increasing elemental and internal damage reduction by 5%. Now Inure has two roles. For internal and elemental damage, it can be a damage reduction that's increased by 5%. Keep in mind that's that separate damage reduction. Or we can use Inure to cleanse us. So it's really great to use Inure whenever we see internal elemental damage. We might actually cleanse it. If we don't cleanse it, we're reducing that damage. And additionally with Inure, we increase our amount of hit points that we have. If I activate it, we go up, in my situation, go up to 580,000 hit points. If I use that with some damage reduction, it allows me to absorb a really, really big hit and potentially survive it. So Inure can play a really big role in timing it, and it's going to become really fight dependent. Lastly, defensive swings. Deal damage with Blade Barrage, increases your defense chance by 2%, stacks up to 3 times and lasts for 6 seconds. We already saw that. So that's the ability tree. We've looked at all of our defensives. We saw the Shield Adrenal, and we got an idea of how we can use some of our AoEs independently and our range attacks independently. And then our filler is going to be Strike. So just a quick review. As I leap in, I taunt, Threatening Scream, AoE Taunt, Blade Barrage. I'm just going to go down the line, taunt again, and now I'm just striking, and here these abilities become available. I'm just filling with Strike. Okay, and it's going to take some practice to get these numbers really nice. This is the main setup for the Guardian here. Let's go look at the Juggernaut side real quick. So here on the Juggernaut side, we have the same configuration. One additional thing that we can cover up is what's called the Guardian Leap, and on the Juggernaut side it's Intercede. And so if we have a friendly, we can intercede by leaping to them and giving them the intercede buff. And the leaps to friendly target, reducing the threat and moderate amount of, and reduces the damage taken by 20% for 6 seconds. So it's a damage reduction, and in certain fights that is really, really handy. Some fights are really scripted in that an attack will go out to a random target. If you pick up that random target, and when it's not you, you can leap to them, and when that attack goes out, they'll have an additional damage reduction of 20%. You might have to go with Mad Dash instead of Saber Reflect, because you might have to get out of the area of that attack. So you're going to go with your Intercede or Guardian Leap to the target, and then point away and Mad Dash out of that. So it'll look something like this. You'll leap in and Mad Dash out of the attack area. And that might be a really viable strategy, and you can see the Mad Dash is going to become available soon enough, and you can do another Intercede. Okay. Just want to point out that line 43, dealing direct damage to taunted target generates 1 rage. This effect cannot occur once, can only occur once every second. Keep in mind that that heal is not listed in there. But if we go to an enemy and we taunt and do damage, we see those heals. So those heals are in there, even though it's not listed in the text. Let's quickly look at the rotation here, our opening sequence. Okay, very easy rotation to follow. You sort of have these three abilities as a priority. Ravage is whenever it comes off cooldown. And then I can just fill in with any of these other attacks. If I need to save my AoE attacks, they're right here. And my range attack is these two abilities, and I can save them in certain scenarios. Let's go a little bit back to the browser. You select your combat logs from that folder that I listed before. I like to keep it private and then click on Analyze. And it gets this fight out for us, and we can look at this specific one. And what I want to do is change our point of view to me as a tank. And we can look at effects. The first one is just the mechanics of this fight, but the next one is retaliating defense. And notice how I'm just keeping it up all the time. There's some period here where I couldn't do it. Aegis Assault being that Warning Strike buff. And I reset it here and then got the retaliating defense back up. And you can see the little gaps in between where I reset the retaliating defense and then Aegis Assault, which is from that repose retaliation one. It's the same effect. This shows you how much uptime I keep on this. Blade Barricade is also up there all the time. Revenge is up there all the time. The Aegis Shield, which is that 6-second warding shield that we saw. Look at how much it's up all the time. And so this is really, really handy to understand. Are you doing your tasks? Are you keeping your defensives up? Okay. We can look at damage received. What's really handy here is we can look at the different hits, how many hits they were on us, which attacks get defense chance, which attacks does the shield chance work on, and we can sort them by this. We see that lightning, that can be affected by the shield. Lunge is at 33%, but keep in mind there was only 3 lunges, so it probably would be higher. Infesting Strike, very interesting. Like this is a pretty much an AoE that the sort of like a little slight conal that the shield did work, but it wasn't up at the 50% chance, so very interesting there. Devour, there's a lot of attacks from Devour, and it's only there, but look at how defense chance was up. I probably activated a defense ability, so the defense chance went up, and I probably reduces their accuracy as well, and that might have helped me here with my defense chance. So don't neglect defense chance completely. It has a role to play in many situations. It's just depending on which one is doing the most hit. Let's sort it by damage. So lightning being the one that caused the most total damage on us. Our defense chance did a little bit, probably because I used the defense ability at some point. And then the shield chance is really doing its job here. So it works, the shield really worked at reducing that damage on average by 16%. Infesting Strike. So the only thing that isn't listed in here is what our damage reduction was. Absorb does incorporate damage reduction, but the problem is that we can't separate that from the shield and defense effectively. We can see that there's some attacks that ignores defense and ignores shield, but damage reduction did work because it did reduce the total number of damage. And we can divide these numbers to get an effective idea of how much our damage reduction worked for us. Okay, so this allows us to analyze our fight, see where we're getting certain damages. We can even look at the overall summary, see who had the most damage received, what was the absorb percentages. We can even go in and look at different players to understand what was going on. We can now also go and see healing received, see what was the healing distribution here. Okay. And then we can go back to the replay as a tool. We can also do replay. Let's just go to a certain player. and they have their own replay. This is not a graphical display, but we can now see effects on self, damage done, damage received, effects on target. So we can break this down. We can do the speed playback at half speed. So this helps us analyze as a tool, and I wanted to stress this just because it's really handy to understand where your damage is coming from. If you're learning a new fight, you might want to see the damage received, see the breakdown, see which abilities might actually be useful. Whenever you expect a lunge, defense chance does work. So maybe use a defensive that increases your defense chance could be a really key option here. In addition to this, I wanted to look at Parse. So Parse is a similar tool. It just can do it in real time, and I can click the Parse button and I can get my stats real time, and I can use the interface and check off personal stats, and this will give me a floating window that I can pull up. I can do raid damage, raid healing, raid threat, and to see who's got what threat in real time. It's about delayed by 1 second to 3 seconds depending on how it's being written, but it's in enough time frame that it's useful. So the other option other than parsing is that I can take my log files after the fact and I can drag and drop them in on Parse. I now have that same fight that we were looking at on the website. I can look at the individual combat log as they were happening. I can actually search for function abilities. Okay. I can look for death. See who died, the fire probe was killed. Okay. So I can see what the causes of when the deaths happen. I can find that time frame, go back and look at that by removing the death, going down and finding the time when that happened. That's the individual attacks. So this is really handy in breaking it down. If you really need to understand what killed me, what was the mechanics behind it, it can be really handy. We also have our damage taken here. We can check off ability and we can see the abilities and which was causing the most damage. Okay. We can do healing. Healing done at this point. We can healing taken. This is by source and we want it by ability. So this is really handy in understanding in real, if as you did the fight, let's say you died, you want to understand like, oh, where was what happening? In addition to all of this, I can flip the focus. I can look at Lord Kanath. Okay. And I can see damage done to the players by what ability. This is from the perspective of Lord Kanath. So I can see that Lord Kanath did lightning to this player. I can do the target. I can remove that and just look at the abilities and see, oh, Seed of Echoes is the most outgoing damage of everything. Okay. So, and then I can go to the overview, and as a tank, I can do the damage taken per second to understand how much damage the whole team is taking. And this can be really handy in a quick, short-handed way of figuring out what's going on. The website is definitely a much more effective tool. It has a lot more details in it than Parse. So save your combat logs. Just keep in mind that the combat logs keep building up. So delete them once you haven't a need for them after a while. Go into that folder and just clean up the old ones. But if you've just done a fight and you want to understand what's going on, the Parsley website is definitely really, really handy in understanding it. I hope you find this guide helpful. Remember, as the director of the team, that communication is really key to the fight. And remember, have fun.